You're listening to Clock the Tea with Dr. Long.
The state is ignoring a very important point, and that is the right of Richard and Mildred Loving to wake up in the morning or to go to sleep at night, knowing that the sheriff will not be knocking on their door or shining a light in their face in the privacy of their bedroom.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Clock the Tea with Dr. Long. This is your host, Mark Long, and I'm launching a mini-series this season called The Conversation. And today's conversation is about interracial love, and what does that mean? Well, let's take a dive into some of the history just to get started. Take a listen to this.
On July 11th, 1958, at 2 a.m., a county sheriff entered the home of Virginia couple Richard and Mildred Loving, forced them out of their bed, and placed them under arrest. Their crime? Interracial marriage. This is the story of Loving versus Virginia and the landmark civil rights decision that would set an important precedent for marriage rights in America. Richard, who was white, and Mildred, who was black and Native American, spent the early morning hours of July 11th in jail. They were tried and found guilty of violating Virginia's Racial Integrity Act of 1924, a series of laws that made race mixing illegal. The Lovings were then given an ultimatum: spend 1 year in prison or leave the state of Virginia for 25 years. Frightened and unaware of their legal options, they moved to Washington, D.C., where their marriage was legal. They raised their 3 children in the nation's capital, financially strapped and isolated from friends and family. 5 years later, they returned to Virginia to visit Mildred's relatives, but were arrested for a second time for traveling together. Inspired by the burgeoning civil rights movement, Mildred decided to fight back. So in 1963, she wrote a letter to U.S. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy asking for his advice. Kennedy referred the Lovings to the American Civil Liberties Union, who assigned their case to 2 young lawyers named Bernard Cohen and Philip Hirschkopf.
Tea sippers, it is a great topic to talk about because interracial love is what it is. It's just love. And before we dive right into the conversation of Loving versus Virginia from 1967, I think it's important that we take a look back at what was going on in the United States prior to that case. So, interracial marriage in the United States was already tightly policed. It was criminalized and it was culturally condemned for centuries before the case. Now, there were laws that existed in the United States, and some of the oldest and most enduring forms of racial control in America was pretty much policing who one can love and who one can be with. So, it shaped a lot of the family ideology, citizenship, and racial identity from the 1600s all the way up to the mid-20th century. Now, let's dive a little bit more deeper and talk about some of these other policies that existed. Firstly, we know in the 1660s, in the Virginia and Maryland area pretty much, there are laws that already existed in regards to interracial marriage bans. But most importantly, it focused a little bit more on people marrying enslaved folks and people who are marrying people who are of Native descent. And furthermore here, ministers who officiated interracial marriages during that time could be fined around 10,000 pounds of tobacco. And that was during colonial Virginia. So that comes to show you how the very fabric of the country was very based on race and the ideology of what a interracial union is and how it was seen as a threat to the hierarchy of property systems and those who could have established wealth and thrive in such societies. So, moving on to the 1700s all the way up until right before the Civil War, we know that there is something that existed called the one-drop rule, which was a racial purity ideology hardened and defining whiteness as fragile and requiring protection. And these beliefs later fed into the 19th century, in regards to the conversation around eugenics, which came around then. So, by the Civil War, there were some bans that were embedded in the Southern, Western, and several Midwestern state codes that were written as law. So, regardless of if they were fighting for the freedom of enslaved folks, there were still codes that were written into law that pretty much made it possible for those who were white and those who were black or those who were of other race would not be intermingling in regards to marriages or creating offspring. So, moving past the Civil War, we know that Jim Crow came along. And during Jim Crow, all but 9 states enacted laws forbidding interracial marriages at some point. Now, we know these laws targeted more than black-white unions. 7 states banned marriages between white people and Asians, and also we know that Western states banned marriages between Native Americans or people with more than one half Indian blood, as they would say at the time. So, some key Supreme Court cases before the Loving case was Pace versus Alabama in 1883. The court upheld Alabama's interracial relationship ban, claiming it was constitutional because both races were punished equally. And this precedent protected anti-miscegenation laws for 18 more years afterwards. Let's take a dive into what this conversation looks like today.
The 14th Amendment, designed to eliminate discrimination based on race, was ratified in 1868, and for a long time courts undermined that purpose. One such case occurred in 1883's Pace versus Alabama. An Alabama statute made it a crime to engage in adultery or fornication. Adultery occurs when a married person has sex with someone other than the person's spouse. Fornication means unmarried people having sex. The statute provided that for a first offense, the offenders would be fined at least $100 and could be jailed for up to 6 months. However, if an African American and a white person married or engaged in adultery or fornication, they would both be sentenced to prison for between 2 and 7 years. Mary Cox, a white woman, and Tony Pace, an African American man, were convicted of living in adultery or fornication and were each sentenced to 2 years imprisonment. The Alabama Supreme Court affirmed their convictions, and the United States Supreme Court granted Pace's writ of error.
All right, T-Sippers, so let's clock the T. So before Loving versus Virginia, there was this case all the way from the 1800s to late 1800s that was settled basically by imprisonment. So let's get this straight. Before Loving, interracial couples could face imprisonment, they could be arrested, they could be socially ostracized, they could be violently targeted by mobs, they could be denied property rights, inheritance, and parental rights. And just in 1967, which was around the time some of my aunts were born, my parents, or my mother, if you will, right during that time was when they finally declared that all race-based marriage bans were unconstitutional. And they were unconstitutional as it exists under the Equal Protection and Due Process Clause, which was added from this case with Loving versus Virginia. Now, it's important to also note that that wasn't even that long ago, and we're still dealing with the repercussions from our society being so embedded in racial purity and wanting to make sure the cleanliness exists. But if you just love who you love, just if you were to love someone who was 2 years older, 2 years younger as an adult, it comes to just be like people should just grow up and not worry about that kind of stuff. And I'm glad that we finally get to have the conversation because I think it's important. Now, I want to switch gears in the talk here. I want to talk a little bit more about what does it mean to be in an interracial relationship now, especially when it comes to political ideology. Well, as someone who's in an interracial relationship, I can tell you, I love who I love. And through and through, regardless of my sexual orientation, regardless of my identity, regardless of how I express myself, sometimes you just fall in love with those who make you feel safe, and those who make you feel seen, and those who you can gravitate towards. And I think love should always work that way. But we can't ignore the idea that politics has played a role over the years. And we know this because research shows that discrimination and political engagement are intertwined. And there was a cross-national study that was done at Cambridge University on this. And from the study, it was identified that people who experience discrimination often become more politically engaged, especially in the United States. And in the United States, it also shows that a distinctive political conflict over voting rights for racial minorities, which affects turnout and political mobilization, has a huge impact on someone feeling safe enough to date outside their race or to be comfortable with having more conversations of what that looks like. So, the political conflict reinforces racial boundaries and can indirectly affect how interracial families navigate civic life, which is very important to consider with some areas that are more gerrymandered than others and that kind of thing. And we also know that racial resentment influences political behavior. So, when there's white racial resentment from those who feel some type of way about our history, as they should, There's conversations to be had about the fact that race does matter in regards to interracial discrimination because interracial families often become targets when political rhetoric stokes racial resentment and they get made fun of because they're not fitting what the American ideology is a lot of people still to this day believe that you stay over there and they stay over here, or you live here, we live here, and if you decide to date outside your race or make a new life, that you are a traitor to those around you. So there's a lot of that rhetoric that still exists. But most importantly, the political system may have had long use of retaining this racial caste when it comes to like certain laws. So we talked about the miscegenation laws, we talked about segregation, we talked about voting restrictions, and the Thurgood Marshall Institute noted that the political actors have repeatedly used policy to advance a culture of exclusion, inequity, and racial casting in order to preserve power. Now, there's no hiding that there's a lot of conversations to be had present day, and with the notion of power being at play, we know that a lot of people feel threatened by what that looks like. Some people have a certain view or vantage point of what they think that love looks like and what they've been told love looks like and who they should fall in love with or who they should be around. And sometimes when something goes against your status quo, you often tend to veering off and making assumptions or becoming frightened. Take a listen to this.
Black women, of course, seem to be willing to follow in their footsteps. Winnie Harlow, should Black women date outside their race?
Black women and all women should date whoever they want to date. I was raised in a home by a single Black woman. My mom and my father, my whole life, have had an amazing relationship. They raised me separately, but cordially. In this time of my mom being single, I obviously met a lot of her boyfriends, and they were multiracial. She dated Black guys, she dated white guys. So I think for me, it was something that I was taught that, I mean, all people are equal and everyone deserves love. I've personally dated outside of my race. I've dated Black guys, I've dated white guys. And I don't think those aspects of them altered what went right or wrong in our relationships. I think whatever our disputes were happened to do with the type of person that I am and the type of person that he was as a person, not as a race.
Was it easier or harder dating interracially or not?
No, because I think everything is an education. I think, the main thing is hair. I think, first of all, Black men have a problem with learning these things as well. Like, you have to learn that, yeah, I have a beautiful wig on right now, but you're going to wake up with me with a bonnet, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think all these things are just an educational thing, whether it be race, whether it be men versus women, whether it be whatever it is, all these things just have to do with education.
I like the direction of the conversation with Winnie Harlow there from that clip. It was from the OWN Network on YouTube, and there's a recent clip that resurfaced about conversations about Black women and dating outside their race and what that looks like for them. And obviously, I can't speak to the point of view of a Black woman, but it's interesting to hear Winnie Harlow talk about her experience and how education and learning through dating was actually her way into understanding interracial love. And coming from a single parent household, she was able to kind of explore a little bit more of that by actually seeing her own parent date men of different races. And now she does the same thing. So I do think lived experience plays a huge role in interracial love. And sometimes it could be reminiscent of your environment and where you grew up. Sometimes it cannot. Sometimes it can be the lack of, certain people that are available within your community. And sometimes it cannot. And it's just more so about a personal preference and a personal understanding of the love and compatibility that you're looking for in a partner, which really trumps all of everything else. I believe there's a lot of different conspiracies around interracial dating and conspiracies from older generations about what they were told, and a lot of people aren't willing to move forward with the times. That's why it's important to not erase books, to be more culturally aware, to learn from other people that you're around, because you might have an idea about what something looks like, but deep down inside, it's just an innocent form of love, and I think that's something that's worth embracing. Switching gears, I thought it would be important to talk about the conversation in ways that are kind of fun. Sometimes you learn different cultural aspects of being in an interracial relationship, but most importantly, you develop skills over time as well. And not necessarily did you have to code switch, did you have to change who you are. In fact, you become more of who you are. In my opinion, it's just all about exposure. Take a listen to this.
Well, there's a lot of unlearning I had to do. Koreans are actually anti-black as fuck. Being a son of Korean immigrants, definitely I felt insecure because of the way my parents were like treating our relationship.
Brandon being Korean, we were just in the Korean community a lot, and I just got a lot of stares. I don't know. It's not nice to like feel that, you know.
So there's times where like older black women will look at her and be like, why are you with this white man? Because that's what a lot of people just will see me as sometimes.
I got a cousin who's very hotet. I think I blocked her on Instagram at this point.
She saw a picture of him and I on his Instagram and felt the need to comment how upsetting it was for her to see.
When it comes to this issue, we don't see eye to eye, and it is what it is.
I had this girl harassing me because I'm black. I ended up having to get a restraining order against her.
This girl threatened to lynch her. She actually showed up to our house on multiple occasions and like tried to break into our home.
How did you know this person?
She just always on social media. It ended up really worrying my wife's parents because they never dealt with something like that.
What's the biggest racial stereotype you embody?
I make noises when I eat.
Asian people are loud when they eat.
Like they don't have manners.
Like there's this thing where like after Korean people eat, they make like sounds. He'll be like, that's what I love about him though. It's so extra.
Liza was telling me when I was going to visit her family, like make sure you like keep it quiet when you eat because it's not respectful to be loud, like smacking and stuff.
The stereotypes about Ethiopians is definitely big foreheads, receding hairlines. I happen to fit both of those descriptions.
Mark has a large forehead, but that's because he's bald.
What's the biggest racial stereotype your partner embodies?
She has wide hips and like a big butt.
Oh, my big booty. I guess that is a stereotype. I have a really big butt.
You like a big butt?
Me? Of course.
She's a rapper.
She does some weird shit sometimes, but sometimes I'm like, damn, white people. Like her grandmother, she used to make pillows with dog hair. That's weird, right?
Tea sippers, that goes to show you a lot, especially when it comes to interracial dating or marriages or being with someone outside your race in general. There's just so much to learn, and you're always learning from each other. But one caveat that comes with that, you're going to always be exposed to some kind of ignorance, whether you want to or not. People are going to have their opinions because people like exposure to diversity, but they also like exposure to just being kind and accepting people for who they are. And sometimes race can still play a role. We see that based on what some of these couples were exchanging about, just how some of their families interacted or cousins or friends and what they said after finding out who their partner was. And with that said, I think it's good to take a look back because back in the 1970s, interracial marriage was basically the social equivalent of showing up to church in a crop top, and only about 3% of newlyweds were interracial. So think about that. And fast forward to today, America actually is more aligned with the love is love theory because 17% of newlyweds are now interracial in the United States. But we have to look at a little bit more information. So don't get me started about cohabitation, right? The girlies living together now without paperwork even more, they're more adventurous because it comes to show that 28% of couples that are cohabitating right now are interracial. And that's a jump from 15% in 2000. Now, let's take a look around the country itself. If you look at the West, there's 21% of marriages right now that are interracial. And 8 out of the top interracial newly metros also in the West, and we know that that's California, and we know that interracial there has actually boosted marriages by 189% since 1990. That's quite the jump. And in the South, we know it's a little bit less likely, but the South has layers to it. And we know that black and white intermarriages are the most prevalent in parts of Virginia, Maryland, and DC, because you're going to see a lot of people who are biracial or multiracial within that region. Now, if we head into the Northeast, it's pretty prevalent there, I would say. And I would say it kind of clocks at around 17 to 18% in regards to interracial marriages, only second to the West Coast, which if you look at that by numbers, you will see a lot more people who live with people outside of their race or who are most likely to even be in a category of getting married to someone outside their race. Now, checking in back here in the heartland in the Midwest, and bless our heart, Historically, interracial marriage here in the Midwest has been the lowest, but it's still rising, and it's not giving main character energy in regards to interracial love and people being comfortable with dating outside their race here in the Midwest. But it comes to show that the numbers are still there, and it still happens. So a final word here on this is that America went from don't you dare to do what you want. And the receipts are in because 6 to 10% increase in regards to interracial partnerships have happened since the 1970s, as we mentioned. And the West is the queen right now. The South is kind of like here or there. The Northeast is the second in regards to where you will see a lot more people who are interracially together. And the Midwest is just trailing behind them all. And without further ado, I think we should dive into what is happening with people within a Loving family from the Loving versus Virginia case back in 1967. Take a listen to this.
For Richard and Mildred, it was love at first sight, but it was also a crime when they married 54 years ago and wanted to live in Virginia. They were arrested at home in the middle of the night.
They asked Richard who was that woman he was sleeping with. I said, I'm his wife, and the sheriff said, not you, you're not.
Their struggle to live together in a state that outlawed interracial marriage is the focus of a new HBO documentary, The Loving Story. Richard and Mildred Loving were convicted and exiled from Virginia for 25 years. This soft-spoken, unassuming couple never intended to make history. They just wanted to raise their 3 children together.
She didn't want to be a Rosa Parks, and no, he didn't want to be a Martin Luther King. I think the world needs to know that it was because of my parents. Sorry. That they can marry any race they want.
The civil rights movement gave the Lovings hope. Phil Hirschkopf argued on their behalf before the U.S. Supreme Court. The result? A landmark ruling in 1967, striking down the last of the segregation laws against mixed-race marriage.
The court was ready for us. They would not any longer tolerate such a deprivation of rights.
After Richard and Mildred's death, director Nancy Bursky felt compelled to document the couple's defiance.
It was a story about race, but it was also such a profound love story.
And a story of reluctant heroes.
How would you describe your mom and dad? Very loving, stern, private, but with great determination.
Wow. So let's clock that T. That wasn't that long ago. And I'm happy that the Loving versus Virginia case happened because it didn't just change the law, it changed the country's emotional IQ when it comes to race. And let's start with the receipts because history matters. Richard and Mildred Loving proved that being different isn't a scandal. It's a constitutional right. Their marriage wasn't a political statement. It was a human one. Exactly that. And the fact that the case was literally called Loving, please, y'all, that's the universe's way of winking at us, reminding us that love has always been bigger than fear. And where I step in here is I've dated inside my race, outside my race, and everywhere love decided to land. Now with a white partner. And let me tell you, the learning, the growing, the expanding, it's real. And it's never over. It's not performative. It's not theatrical. It's not, I read a think piece once. It's not that. You get to access someone else's world and someone else gets to access your world with your permission. And in someone else's way of seeing the country, you can kind of look at it from a vantage point of explaining yourself, but not necessarily doing the homework for someone else. They're actually doing the homework on their own if you find the right partner who's willing to have those conversations. And we know suddenly from that, you can be having conversations on a random Tuesday night because your partner has a lived experience that makes you kind of like question things. And it's not just romance because it's an evolution of what it means to be infatuated and in love with those who you care about. And let's clock it. So we're different, right? And we're building something together. That's kind of what the vibe is of being in an interracial relationship. But it's more smoother than you think. You find out that you might have common goals. You might want the same stability, the same joy. Sometimes you want similar things in your future. And you realize that race isn't a barrier. It's just a bonus track because it sharpens your empathy, it widens your perspective, and it makes your relationship feel like a collaboration instead of a copy and paste or live your life because society tells you you have to live your life this way. And let's address the haters real quick because They've always had to RSVP without being invited. Some folks will try to introduce you as a stereotype by calling you a traitor, or just pretending like they can't understand your relationship because it doesn't fit into their limited worldview, or because they're miserable, single, and old. That happens as well. And honestly, that's their homework to do, not yours. You don't need to shrink yourself or your love to fit someone else's comfort zone. You don't need to justify your joy or love to people who haven't even updated their emotional software since dial-up times. The truth is very simple here, tea-sippers. Love is not a group project. You don't need public approval to be happy. You don't need cultural permission at all. And people will project onto you. They will misunderstand you, or they will just invent complete narratives because they're bored. Let them. Your relationship isn't a debate, and it's definitely not a debate stage for people to chime in about their opinion. It's your home and what you're building brick by brick. So, I leave you all today by saying this. Embrace who you are, embrace who you love, and embrace your story, because it doesn't have to look like someone else's. Thank you all for listening. Remember to love boldly, love widely, and love without apology. Bye, tea sippers. Hope to see you next time.